Hi, I'm Len Epp from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Leanpub podcast, I'll be interviewing Isaak Tsalicoglou. Based in Athens, Isaak, and I'm going to use his own words here because I tried to write a better introduction about him than he wrote about himself, and I couldn't, so here we go. Isaak writes about all aspects of organizations, turning their knowledge about markets, customers, and technology into a competitive advantage through the judicious use of technology, vigorous collaboration across functions and locations, and an entrepreneurial mindset. But he also writes about how hype, dogmatism, agency issues, culture clash, and misaligned incentives prevent organizations from doing so, end quote. You can find him on LinkedIn at @Isaak, or you can also read his popular posts. Isaak is the author of a number of current and forthcoming Leanpub books, including the one we're talking about today, the recently completed Northwind Elixir Traders, Learn Elixir and Database Modeling with Ecto and SQLite, all in one project. In this interview, we're going to talk about the book, about what the story of the book and how it came about. And also, we're going to talk at length about how Isaak wrote it, his process for writing it, all the 20-hour days that went into it, a little break in the middle, and some of the psychological aspects of writing and completing a really big project, including a very detailed technical book. So thank you very much, Isaak, for being on the Leanpub podcast again.
Thank you, Len, for having me again.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story, but since Isaak is a repeat guest, that means you can go back in time a little bit on our YouTube channel, and you can find our first interview with him there where you can learn about his background. So for this interview, we're just going to talk about the background of the book. How did it come about? What's its origin story? And then we'll get into some of the details. So Isaak, could you please just tell us the story of this book?
Yeah. So the book begins on a whim, as many of the books I've written have begun, or all of them basically, either from a LinkedIn post or an article or an exploration that then becomes part of a documentation or just emptying my brain in a way. And it also, however, this one began from a need to understand some things better. What happened is I got into the Elixir programming language in the end of 2022. A very good friend of mine who is very professional in programming Scala, which as I understand is a functional programming language. And I guess he's also a big fan of Haskell and those languages that people don't use that much. He told me I was telling him the troubles I had with working with Django, which is in Python, it uses classes, so it's object-oriented programming. And he told me about functional programming. He was very enthusiastic. So given that I had paused my development work for a while because I was developing apps for the family business that I've been running for the past 5 years, at the time, 3.5 years, I was very intrigued because I had struggled a lot after doing some development. So what happened was we had to digitalize the business in a way to make it more efficient, because I found myself struggling with basically manual labor, copying data between spreadsheets and Word documents, and to make offers, to maintain the inventory of the company, to send emails. All of that was very manual as a process. That's how it had grown to be over almost 30 years at the time. And so when I returned from a corporate environment, first of all, I felt that I was not working enough because I had gotten used to very long working hours. And secondly, I was feeling that not only am I working long, but the things I'm working long on are not worth spending so much time on. And so in the beginning, what I did was, really take you back to the beginnings of this, let's say the origin story of the book is, initially I digitalized the product items because we had to do electronic invoice increase at some point. The government was saying it's going to come, but then came the COVID lockdowns, and they delayed it. At some point, they say sometime in August 2021, they say, okay, 1st of October, all the invoices must be digitalized, which means that all the items you sell must have a code. Otherwise, you cannot put them on an invoice on every line. So suddenly, after almost 3 decades where we had no codes and we were issuing invoices without any codification of the products, we had to really rush to have some kind of code. And of course, you can start putting 1, 2, 3, and that's a missed opportunity though, because when you already we have very modular products that we sell, but we sell in Greece. And when you have a structure in the portfolio, it makes sense to be able to identify which product category a product is in. Is it a spare part? Is it a new item? Is it a modular one? And so on. Even purely for avoiding manual typos. So I started with getting back into databases, and I used a low-code thing called NoCodeDB that basically gives you something like an Excel sheet with multiple tabs, and you create your database schema like an Excel sheet, and it already generates a REST API so that you can use programmatically from any language you want, of course, because it's HTTP. And I spent a few weeks building that and writing the code in Python. I mean, totally terrible code. We're talking, it's not even a terminal application. It's not even a web app. It's just basically I open a REPL in Python and I type the function names to create items, to create variants. But it worked and it's still working. And this was the first bout of digitalizing something that really made it possible to sell or to continue selling and to continue invoicing. And then I set my sights onto bigger things. I thought, we are not going to introduce an ERP because we're a tiny business, and an ERP costs a lot of effort. Because then the challenge with ERPs and with all the software system is that you are not the ones running it. It is the software that ends up running you. And when you have very few people who are not digital, let's call them digital natives, it's difficult to get everyone on board. So what I thought was, well, okay, I used Fast API in Python then to make some trials. I have used what was called the DRF. No, it was called Flask many years ago. I had not figured it out. I was too busy to care. And I thought, let's use Django, because Django is a web framework for Python that gives you a fantastic admin UI. So you don't need to program the user interface. It does almost practically everything for you, and it's very customizable. Which means that I remember it was the beginning of the winter in 2021. And I remember spending every evening after work, almost every evening, trying to figure out how to build this, very, how do you call it? Like it was like a delusion of grandeur that I'm going to program an ERP by myself, like our own Tectra ERP. I called it TRP. And I started building out the schemas in Django and everything, and everything was interlinked. Everything was working fantastically as long as you were in the admin UI. But if you wanted to create new orders, to enter new inventory data, to somehow interlink those and make it user-friendly, beyond what the admin UI was offering, you had to escape into a web app. And when you want to build a web app where you add new rows to products and so on, suddenly that's where my knowledge stopped, because I had always had an allergy toward JavaScript. I always considered it scary somehow, even though I programmed C, C++, Fortran 77, Fortran 90 in the past as an engineer. I somehow felt that JavaScript is a mess I don't want to get into, because every time I had tried to run something with JavaScript, always some dependency was missing, or NPM was saying this package is outdated, and this kind of dependency hell had scared me off. So there I am trying to make a very simple form where I can say so much of this product at this price, add new row, so much of this product at that price. And I somehow made it work, but it didn't work properly. And I remember after so many weeks of trying it out and trying to wrap my head around the classes of Django and how the maintainers of the software think, which is not how I think, because I think more in a functional programming way. As an engineer, I take an input, I give it to a function, it gives me an output. No hidden state. I don't need to work through somebody else's mindset. I just do it from scratch. And I remember feeling, seriously, since we're talking about the psychological aspects, it was sometime in December 2021, and I wouldn't say burned out because it's an overused term, but I remember that every time then I tried to get back into it, I felt, sometimes you feel this disgust here that you cannot, you push away, you push back. That's what I felt. And I stopped programming between December and sometime in June. So what happened in June was, back then we still had, so it was 2022 and there was still COVID going around. So someone in the office caught COVID. The only person in the office to catch COVID, and we all isolated. So I spent 1 week isolated at home, doing work in the morning as much as you can do work remotely when you have to call customers, clients, and so on. And at some point, I made a hard stop like we usually do at 3. And I said, from that point on, since I have now 1 week where I also was waiting to see if I'm going to be symptomatic. I never was. I have a week where nobody will disturb me in the evenings or afternoons. So I thought, instead of doing this megalith, I won't even call it monolith, it was a megalith of trying to link classes and all those different databases, so all those different table schemas in one thing. Let's take it apart now that I put the effort to think about what kind of fields I need, how those are connected, and make them, you could call them microservices. That's what they actually are. They're like really micro things. They do one thing and they do it really well, and they are purpose specific. So the first thing I did was I made a very simple web UI for the product items. And I didn't even use a database at the time. So there was NocoDB somewhere in the backend deployed in a virtual machine. And what it did was, and it sounds super junky, and it still is junky, and it works amazingly well, is every time I would create new products, I wrote a command that would dump an Excel file and a CSV file. And then I wrote an app that every time that watches the file asynchronously, and every time that the file would change on the disk, it would reload the file into memory, and then it would serve a very nice view on the products through a very simple web UI. And at the time, also HTMX was coming up. HTMX is a JavaScript library that helps you use JavaScript without using JavaScript. So it adds some attributes to elements. So you can say that when an action happens, you can make basically every element clickable. So when something happens here, you will go and fetch a fragment of HTML from the server from this endpoint, and you'll stuff it here. So if you need information about something that doesn't exist yet on this page, you click it and it appears. You can do all kinds of crazy things. And it gets out of flack because it goes against all the complexity of modern React, Next.js, all the Vue and Angular frameworks. So anyway, I built this in 1 day. And then I basically take this and copy paste it on the inventory, which was and still is managed using an Excel sheet, which is crazy. But we don't have also a huge inventory, so it is doable. And I made also the so-called depot app, so the inventory app. And then I took the exact same structure and I made another microservice for invoices, another one for something else, another one for offers. And so I made a whole suite of little things. And after this week, I came back to the office, and within 2 or 3 weeks after showing our logistics person and operations manager how to use it, because we worked a lot together, suddenly everything was unstuck. Like before, I had to prepare an offer from the moment that I know what I need for the customer to coming to a document that I can send by email, a PDF usually. It would take me around 30 minutes. Find the prices, copy paste them, maybe copy a link here, enter the information of the product, copy it from some older docx that we had that had the same product. And it went down to something like 5 minutes, not even, because the codes. I made a spreadsheet that automates the request to the API. So it was amazing. And that unlocked so much time that I started to say, well, now I work even less. At least the hours I work are well spent, because I'm done in like a fraction of the time it used to take me. And that was very helpful because we have a lot of new orders coming in at the time. And so it helped us all deal with the workload. And that's how I got back into programming, because as soon as I saw that, hey, I can make this, then I started to expand into databases. And then in the summer of 2022, I met my good friend Petros. He tells me about functional programming. I flash back to almost a year ago of struggles with objects and classes and all that. And I go back home and I install Elixir on my Debian Linux workstation. And as soon as I saw the pipe operator, so basically what happens is, for those who don't know, in Elixir you have a function. And if you have a function with 2 arguments, for example, you do not write f of g of h of a comma b. You basically pipe them. So you take a, you pipe it to the first function with a second parameter b, and then you take that and you pipe it into the next one, and you pipe it to the next one. So it's like a pipeline of how data gets transformed from top to bottom. And it clicked because it reminded me a lot of how I used to work on my Hewlett-Packard calculator with the RPN, where you say, I have this, apply this operation, now something else has come out, apply this operation, and you end up with the result you want. And of course, the first thing I tried was to start to remake all the apps I had written in Python, but to remake them using Elixir. And I hit a super hard wall, because even though I love Elixir and I found it very familiar from the beginning, I had to somehow build a database. And I hadn't built a database by hand without using Django or whatever. I mean, basically Django or NoCoDB for many years. Probably since 2003 or so, when I had Informatic 2 at ETH in Zurich. And so I started reading about Ecto. Ecto, as we mentioned, the last one is basically how you interface with databases in Elixir programs. So you have your program uses Ecto to talk to a database adapter that talks to a database. So you have here Postgres or SQLite or MySQL or whatever else is supported. You have a database adapter that is the interface between the database and Ecto. And Ecto talks to, you use Ecto from Elixir, so you have a common interface to practically not all, but many databases. So I get into programming with Ecto, and not exactly in the same way as with Django. I hit different roadblocks because I wanted to go to, I thought, I know already what the databases look like, what the tables look like. So let me just copy paste from tutorials and it should work, right? But the mindset is very different somehow. And you need to learn the DSL, so the specific language in which you describe that this table has these fields and these options, and this field is nullable or not, and all those things I had to learn, but I kind of rushed through. I thought I was being too smart, a smart Alec, like, okay, fine, it's gonna work. It kind of did, and it also didn't. And then I took a step back and started following tutorials. I read everything I could about Ecto, and still it was too theoretical. So 2023 passes with me working more and more with Elixir by programming little programs that I published. Some of them I published on the package management ecosystem of Elixir as open source. And surprisingly, two of them have become modestly successful for the little things that they are, like a library that helps you make the identicons, like those automatically generated avatars that GitHub has or had. And so 2023, I said, is my year of Elixir. This year, I'm all in Elixir, parallel to other things, of course. I will try to program only Elixir and just get it down pat, like figure it out. And the year passes, I've become fluent in Elixir enough, but still not really with databases. And then I get the itch again to say, okay, now I know Elixir, let's start implementing things with databases again. Now that I understand how this ecosystem works, maybe getting into Ecto will be easier. And again, I start with tutorials, and I start remaking little things, and I made many, many little apps with different tables linked. And at some point I thought, okay, everything I'm making is of my own. It's not like a full-fledged database that has many different tables and they're somehow sensibly connected, so that I can learn based on an actual example that is out there. One day, I remember that I had seen something like this way back when, in the 90s, in Microsoft Access. So what happens is Microsoft Access, one of the first versions, 97, came with a few sample databases. So you could load the database in the so-called MDB file. You could load it in Access, and it had the tables and data. So you could run queries, you can make forms. It had also some things pre-built, like little buttons that you can click, so that you can learn with an example. Because I learned the basics of Access in 2008 in the military. I remember we talked about the military last time. So I was managing operations of a unit. inbox, outbox of repair and maintenance operations, and I decided to hold my archive of what is happening in an Access database to make it easier to find. And it was daunting because you open up with this basically an ID, and the program goes, here you go, do everything you want, like make tables, make queries, make views, make whatever. But I remember the database, and I thought, well, okay, the database must have been the Northwind Traders database, the sample database must have been pedagogically somehow sensible.
Right.
It's quite, I mean, it's still quite old. It's also a tiny database. There are also many different versions of it, like the 97 version, the one I base it on. It's not even apparently the proper database. It's a subset that has been released under the Microsoft public license. So you can find it online. It's a set of SQL commands that you run and you recreate the database. And I thought, fine, let's take this one. I'll spend the next however many weeks, I thought it's going to take weeks, to model it with Ecto and play with it in Ecto so that I have one solid example instead of trying to always follow somebody's tutorial about making a to-do list app. You know how it is, right? There's always the same kind of apps, Pokemon, Pokédex, or to-do lists, or libraries, or like bookshelves and so on. Those I could already make, but they are not complex enough. And that's how it started, actually. It was started on I think on a Sunday, so that became a Sunday ritual. Sunday afternoon, I would sit down and I would noodle on the code. And after a while, I thought, well, since I am doing this anyway, why don't I just write it up? And having been a big fan of Leanpub, but not for technical books, I thought, well, maybe there's an opportunity here to write a book too, because if I struggled, for sure there are other people who struggle too to get into this. Not because of lack of intelligence, but because of different modes of thinking, different modes of learning. Like there are some people who want to sit in a classroom and learn, totally fine. Others, they follow tutorials. Others, they take a class. And I took classes, let's say on Udemy, I took quite a few and read a lot. So I immersed myself in Elixir for 1 year. But Ecto still remained rather opaque. And I started writing. And I started in February, then I paused a bit, then picked it up again in March 2024. And in April, I had enough to say, well, let's make a trial balloon. Let's put the first 2 or 3 chapters up on Leanpub and see if there's interest, because I had started having fun with it. So it started to click by implementing something that had a logical consequence, because it was clear what we want to implement. I said the goal is to implement the database, the original database with its data set in Elixir using Ecto, with an asterisk in SQLite, not in Postgres, which is the default database, just to make it more interesting. Also because I really like having files on the drive, like having a set, like 3 files that you copy instead of a database installation, a server. And let's see how far it goes. And that was the beginning. So I would say April when I first launched it, and I announced it on the Elixir forum. I made a post, and I saw likes and I saw first sales, even though I had written only a handful of chapters. I think it was, I can still go back and find the original PDF. It's probably something like 50 pages. And I had set my target to maybe 200 pages that I would be done. Thankfully, I did not overestimate. So I did not make the mistake of saying it's like almost 2/5 done, because it was by far not finished. And very long story short, that's how it started. It started as with frustration, the need to learn something, and the idea that if I find it useful, since I'm finding it useful, why not make into a book that others can benefit from it? And also exercise their Elixir skills. I mean, it's a young language and there is a lot of interest and a lot of tutorials out there, but they're all very sporadic, like how to do this, how to do that. And there are many excellent books on Elixir. Not many. There are a few books on Elixir in general, but all of them, or most of them, are excellent.
Yeah, thank
you. So that's how
Thanks very
That's
much
how
for
it
sharing
began.
all of that. Yeah, that's so well explained and well described. And one of the reasons I was really looking forward to doing this interview with you is, I mean, it's partly to learn about the sort of details of the book and what it's about and things like that. But to talk, I mean, you talk very well in the book, but it's only tangential, obviously, about the psychological aspects of all of these things. And it's one of the interesting things. Like, I get to interview authors all the time. We write on all kinds of different things because Leanpub is the way it is. Many of them are technical books on technical subjects, but the psychological layer of things is always there, whether it's discussed directly or not. And you talk very well just now about how, there's psychological aspects of like not wanting, I mean, the particular difficulties you can have learning something, right?
Yeah.
The difficulties you can have doing something. So for example, like I got a manual error prone process, but then there's like one of the problems with those, like say, like, and I, deal with this myself, spreadsheets and stuff like that. And it's like, why do I keep finding myself procrastinating and not doing that thing? And it's because my process sucks. It's because my tools suck and because my understanding of it sucks. And I hold myself to a high standard and I want to get it right. So I don't do it because I know it's going to be wrong, or there's something wrong about the process. So, but then there's the psychological aspect of resolving that issue of like learning the new things that you need to learn, really getting into detail in your process and understanding what's wrong with it, getting it in your head. And this is where the author part comes in. The really hard part is actually writing it all down well. That's the hardest part, actually, because you always want it. I mean, at least speaking for myself, you always want to skip. You always want a shortcut. You know what I mean? Like it's like really going into like, I left out a step. I don't know. That's when I talk to people who've written long technical books. They often say that that's the hardest part, is just like, you really just want to jump ahead, but then you have to go back and you have to be like, no, anyone following this, it's not just that if they're just going through it step by step, they won't be able to do it. But if they're trying to understand what's going on, they won't be able to understand what's going on if I leave out a step. And that can be the hardest thing psychologically to do.
And that for me was a new one, because I've gotten used to writing. So early in my career, I wrote a lot of technical stuff because I was, as an R&D engineer in a company with an amazing documentation culture. I was used to reading long technical reports, pull out data, use it to develop something else. So literally standing on the shoulders of giants as far back as 1970, that had some insights and measurements about, I don't know, pressures and temperatures of turbines and so on, difficult things. And then I would develop a new component, but my view was always, I would also document the process so that somebody else who comes after me, because nobody, especially nowadays, nobody spends their entire life in one business. So that not only you don't only get the fruit of the development, but you also get the process that we use to develop it so that you can replicate it. Because if somebody has spent the effort to go through it and re-architect it to make it better and make it more automated. For example, I use machine learning. Back in 2010 to 12, I was doing a lot of machine learning in mechanical engineering, which was quite, I mean, it was not unheard of, but it was new. And some colleagues will look at me weird, like, why are you programming in Python and not Fortran? And why are you doing this weird machine learning things with optimization? But I thought, since we found here a new way of doing it, I derive absolutely no benefit from keeping it as if I'm the only one who can ever do this. In fact, maybe it's also my open source friendly mentality that this became my knowledge of how to run the process in a better way. But it was done on company time, and the company that I'm working for, if I leave, fine, I don't get anything from it except the pleasure that I did the work in a better way. But if I stay, it's to everyone's benefit, including mine. I mean, in the end, you can also look at it as an egotistical thing, which it isn't really, but it was done on company time, using company equipment, using company knowledge, using all the amazing people that I work with and who gave insights of, you could change this, you could change that, this is too complicated. So I put it out there. It's like I'm open sourcing it within the business when I'm writing a detailed technical report of, here's how you parameterize the shape of the turbine. Here's how you parameterize the shape of the shaft. These are the important parameters. Here's the source code of the program that automatically makes all the calculations. And here it is in a repository. Back then we used SVN, not Git. Git was not even, I don't know if Git existed back then. Probably it was in its beginnings. And then many years later, as I did my own consultancy in Switzerland, and I started writing content for marketing purposes and to also really just brain dump on some things that annoyed me. And those are the other books I have published on Leanpub, on Lean, Agile, Six Sigma, all that stuff, and criticizing that. I got far away from writing technical things, and I literally forgot exactly what you said, that if you want to write a manual for someone else, people use the word empathy a lot, but to empathize with the reader means to really literally put yourself in his shoes or her shoes and try to figure out, is this understandable enough? Is the author going too fast? Did he skip something? Did he assume that something is understandable? Maybe I need to add an aside here. Maybe I need to add a blurb, which I really like on Markua, because you can add all those little tidbits. And also the other part is to make it enjoyable. I find this is super important. For me personally, it's super important. Like I read a lot of stuff on Ecto, and not dumping on what I read. It was factually fantastic. The good stuff, the good books. There's one book about Ecto, which is the reference for Ecto. Amazingly written, diligently covers from A to Z. You go into it with no idea, and you come out of it with everything, with tons of examples and building some things here, something there. But this is not how I enjoy learning. So I thought, let's have fun with it. You know, for example, the product names that we create for our Skyrim characters and weapons, they just nonsense sometimes, just to play with it. And I thought one element of making things memorable is to create failure deliberately. For example, usually, I don't know how you see it when you have developed something or done something new. You are careful. You don't want to break something. Like you try to do it right the first time. You want to find the golden path to victory, not to spend time exploring the things that you always have this nagging fear. At least I do. This nagging feeling that if I change this, maybe it will stop compiling, and then I will have to bug fix it, and this is such a pain in the neck to fix. And I said, no, let's really take the R&D ethos here. Let's explore the dark corners of doing stupid things sometimes, or following the intuition, like thinking systematically as an engineer. But then sometimes, no matter how much you think systematically, you still have a hunch that might end up being a shortcut or not. And that's why in the book, I also say it's okay to YOLO it sometimes, like to see what happens. Yeah. And this makes it more memorable because you remember, oh yeah, I did this and it didn't work. And now it becomes knowledge. It's not some weird part that maybe would have worked, maybe wouldn't have worked, but thankfully it worked the way it worked, and we can forget about the failure modes, because I find you learn a lot from the failure modes, and it's a safe experimentation environment, this book.
That's exactly. So that's actually, it's funny. You just sort of just said exactly what I wanted to ask you about, but like concepts like learning, but like, enjoyment, playing around, and then being able to fail without being worried about the consequences all come down to, there's a word. For some reason, it struck me when I was reading a quote at the beginning of your book where someone talks about Northwind Traders being a toy database. And the word toy, in this meaning, I first encountered it just learning a little bit about physics and how physicists do things. And they'll build a little toy universe, for example, or they'll talk about things like a spherical cow.
The point mass horse, for example.
For example.
Frictionless ground.
Yeah, like let's start somewhere. We know, but it's key that, and the word toy is very good because it's key that it's kind of not, it's not the real thing. You can play around with it. And those both are and are not kind of lighthearted concepts, right? It's actually it's a toy, but it's a very serious thing that you're doing when you're playing with it. Right, which is you're seeing how it works. You're learning how it works. And again, it's a safe environment. You're just playing around here. I know this isn't a real kind of thing out in the real world, so I can try things. I can fail at things. I can do things without worrying about it breaking. And yes, I mean, I am totally like that. One of my biggest weaknesses is for some reason, need to try and get everything right the first time. And
Yeah.
it's like, if you have that attitude,
I try to.
you get very good at things very fast, and then you stop.
Yes, you plateau.
And so like I've often had this experience in my life where like I'll start playing a new sport or something like that, and people will be like, wow, how like you must have been playing this for years. And it's like, no, I just learned it today. But then I plateau because I don't experiment, because I'm afraid of getting something wrong, because I'm always thinking about the quickest path to winning in the moment or something like that. And so this idea of playing around, like if you're playing with it, like going on, I love the way you described that. Like, and then I remembered something from way back in the 90s that was like a learning. You've been doing all this sophisticated stuff. And then it's like, no. I need to go back to this thing that was like someone built the learn databases, 30 years ago. And it's because it's actually really important to go through that stage of learning, and to remember that wherever you are in your career or learning, you can always go back, to something like that, or you can turn what you're working on into a kind of, in the most serious sense of it, a toy to learn with.
Yes, and that's what I found lucky in corporate environments, and that's why I always pick my roles first based on the boss, second based on the company, third based on the industry. Because if you have a good supervisor who allows you to play and allows room to grow and experiment and doesn't fret about, oh, this was not perfectly done. Yeah, I mean, especially if you have to do things that are in the beginning, I was doing R&D. There you work against the physical laws of nature, but then I moved into project management and process management and product management. Is there really a first time right? Does somebody have the Bible of how things should be done? Yeah, there's a lot of frameworks and a lot of guidances and a lot of blah blah on LinkedIn about this is how you do, I don't know, product-led growth or product management, but seriously, nobody has an empirically validated set of practices that is. So to flip it around, a lot of management stuff, a lot of things that everything that has to do with people is like trying to nail Jello to the wall. It's a shifting ground. Anything you might derive today might be invalid in a year from now because of cultural changes, because the company went through a phase of getting acquired. People know this a lot. I never faced it, but I read about those things and I find the ground just disappears under your feet, and suddenly the place that was fantastic becomes something that you cannot recognize anymore. So it's pointless to try to find the perfect way about doing things that have to do with uncertainty and people and fuzzy, soft things, soft skills, as we call them. But that's why it's important to have space to experiment. And in most corporate environments, or rather, I would say under most people who have a management role, based on what I saw from outside, because I was very lucky to choose also. Now, I was lucky and I made myself lucky by choosing the boss primarily. They allowed me that space to experiment without feeling that if something is not perfect, oh my God, the sky is falling on our heads. I mean, you need to push yourself to do things in a way that nobody has done before, or you have not done before, because we're not doing fundamentals research in management. I mean, it's you made something new, fine. You didn't rediscover the wheel or fire. You just did a new approach of launching a process or developing a product. And what you learn today, if you go to another company, you'll struggle to apply. That's basically all the other books I'm writing, that everything is context specific.
Yeah, you're reminding me of one of my sort of pet peeves, mostly that I've heard about rather than experienced directly, but in management styles, which is a kind of manager who doesn't understand the distinction between experiment and execution. They act like everything's execution all the time.
Yeah.
And it's not. Like if you've ever been in a very serious world, I mean, where very serious things are at stake right now in the moment, yes, there's a time for that kind of mindset. But if you're sitting in an office typing, whether it's, managing a spreadsheet or writing a program or something like that, like that's the time to take advantage of the fact that it's not all at stake right in this moment. Instead, and like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like, another pet peeve of mine is people who have a barking dog because they didn't train it, and they put it in the backyard to literally physically harass everyone within hearing distance.
Micromanagers.
Eventually their conscience kicks in, and what do? They go back and start yelling at the dog. So now there's two animals yelling.
Yeah.
and the one that's being yelled at is going to bark even louder because that's now it's copying you, right?
Yeah.
And you,
It's a very good analogy.
and so keeping in mind that, like, keeping yourself in control, but keeping other people is a way of keeping other people in self-control, the good kind of control. And being empathetic and things like that are not all about it's not all about just being kind of nice, which is the mistake people make, and then associating niceness with weakness, which is another mistake that they make. It's like, you just have to have a concept of the context that you're in. Are you experimenting now? Are you executing now? Which are you doing? Is it all on the line? What would the material result of a mistake actually be? And keep in mind, it might be feeling really bad that you made a mistake. So and that's important. So even if the material consequences of it are limited, if you're a person it sounds like you are, and I definitely am, one typo in an email and I feel bad for an hour. I got to get over that. But what's the answer? A, get over it, but B, find a way to not have typos. Copy and paste names into emails instead of ever actually typing them out. Things like that. So anyway, we could talk about that forever, but just in the interest of time, again, thank you for telling that story of the book so well and all the different things that are going on. And I just really want to take the chance to talk a little bit about the writing process and things like that. Partly reached out to me about. So one thing I just wanted to ask you about, so that you mentioned in your email, was good practices for writing. So in your experience with the 20-hour days and the months at a time, kind of finished getting this book done, what are one or two of your sort of good practices for writing that you would say to someone who themselves is just starting out writing something?
If it's a technical book, replay the book, replay it from start to finish with fresh eyes. I went back at some point. I had 2 chapters left. Those were the most, or 3 chapters left. Those were the most difficult ones. They take up almost half the book. They're huge chapters because I had to figure things out that nobody could tell me. They're nowhere are they documented. They're experiences that you make only by banging your head against the wall, because they have to do with features of the database that are not fit for the purpose and so on. You have to find workarounds. But I would say, you could argue that everything needs to be neatly split into chapters of approximately the same length and everything. I think that causes unnecessary stress. I was stressing about this a lot at the beginning. So let go of those kinds of rules. It will take its shape and the material will organize itself as you progress logically and you replay it. Some chapters will be shorter and some will be far longer. In my view, that's okay, because you cannot expect that miraculously all aspects of the topic you're covering deserve or will automatically have the same length or the same detail or the same effort. So don't push yourself to adhere to some arbitrary rules of neatness. If it's a technical book that's exploratory, if at some point you made a mistake, if it's exploratory and it's not prescriptive, if it's not a huge mistake, then you can leave it in and fix it later, because that's part of the process, of the learning process. However, if you reach a point where you realize, as I did in chapter 14, I built some things, and I did not build some things that would be useful until later on. So in chapter 15, I entered and I had to backtrack a lot in chapter 15 to undo, not to undo, but to, some things I implement in chapter 15, if they came in chapter 14, they would have benefited a lot, because it's code, so we refactor a lot. So the book eventually got a whiff of this, how you organize your code so that it's composable, so that you pull things forward, you structure it better, so it's easier to reuse old code. And I had to rewrite chapter 14 and 15, not from scratch, but to a huge extent. And if you aim for quality, I think it's okay to accept that you might have to rewrite huge parts of the book, and that's totally okay. So that's another thing. So relieve the pressure of doing it right the first time. I think we're coming back to that point. If it's an exploratory book, by definition, it's not going to be right the first time, which means also your process is not going to be right the first time, because you always have, as you said, there's even an aside in the book about an interlude about exploration versus exploitation. And I go into this and explain how we need to think about the next few tables that we're modeling, because we can either exploit what we learned to do, or we can also explore a bit. So should we err towards this or that? To convey the mindset of an engineer who tries to explore the space with minimal waste, knowing that there is no way to reach zero waste because you're developing something, so you have uncertainty. So one thing is to relieve yourself of ritualistic pressures, that the book needs to be a certain length, because I also thought it was going to be 250 or 150 or however many 50 pages, and it ended up being 500 pages. And I always thought, when is it going to end? No, it will end when it ends. If I split into two parts, it doesn't make a coherent story. If I stop early, it leaves the reader with something wanting. So if I'm going to write this book once. So if I'm going to write this once, it deserves to have the quality for which the reader pays. So that was my mindset with this.
Speaking of quality, how did you manage quality assurance during and sort of before sort of marking it as 100% complete?
I replayed the entire book and some of the parts twice. So I copied and pasted every single snippet of code from the terminal into so we in sequence rewrote parts so that I reduce the duplication of code even within the snippet, so that I put something as variables. So I also try to reduce the probability that somebody will make a typo if they're typing it then. So reduce copy paste from before. And I literally replayed the entire book as if I'm somebody who reads it for the first time. And I criticized it as I was going along, and I wrote "fix me" inside, or "this is unclear," and I went back and fixed it. And in fact, at some point, by the way, also with regard to letting go of some things, in my mind, there was always an 18th chapter where we would take the database implemented with SQLite in a way that also makes it work with Postgres. And there will be a chapter ending the book where we say, well, okay, we built it with SQLite. Let's now switch over the backend to Postgres, see that it works or if it works, note what doesn't work, and then also do a few other things that we didn't have the chance to tackle. And when I came close, so when I finished chapter 16, which is the last actual chapter, the 17th one is like outlook and what else you could build, like ideas for your own learning. I remember sitting there saying, does this deserve now, like you have such a huge crescendo of learning. Do you really want to do the leftovers in the end? Does this book really need to have another chapter? So I cut the scope. And even though I was saying it's going to come, I said, no, you want to end the book on a win, on a victory. We conquered a massive hill. So take into account replay the emotions of the person who's reading it, because quality is not only the quality of the code or the quality of the writing or not having typos or the nice formatting, it's the quality of what you evoke in the reader. And I think that's something that needs a lot of attention. So that's why replaying it and look at it through fresh eyes is, for me, was the most difficult part, because I had seen it so many times. So I had to relearn something that I go through things that I had written almost 9 months ago and criticize them and say, does this make sense? Could this be made better? Does this need an explanation? Does this need more explanation? So I would say QA here was beyond spell checking, which I started to do at some point because I found stray typos. Quality assurance was taking care of the emotional journey and making sure that it flows, not perfectly, but much better than I did in the beginning before I started the replay. That was for me the big learning.
One last thing about writing the book is what that I'd like to ask about is you mentioned this was organizing yourself to make time for the final stretch. And I've had that experience myself when I was finishing my doctoral dissertation, and it's like, I know what you mean about the 20-hour days, just like day after day after day, when your final stretch of like a big writing project, and you do need to organize your time. I mean, it came across, I was lucky, I was kind of single and, doing doctorate and stuff like that. When it hit me, I didn't have a job or anything like that, but it's like, wow, like, whoa, this is gonna, like, it was a couple of months like that. Yeah, would you recommend organizing one's time for the final stretch of working on it?
Well, I'm lucky in the sense that I'm self-employed, and so employed and self-employed. So I do different things, run 3 businesses, doing different things in each one, management here, programming there, and so on. So I could reshuffle things during the week as much as I could. So I set aside a few days where I said, I'm not working on the book. Like this day, I'm not working on the book. That today, Monday and Tuesday are devoted to this business where we have the peak at the beginning of the week. If something pops up, I make time for that throughout the rest of the week. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I work on the other business, which is a startup, running and mostly programming now, implementing new features. And the weekend is for the book. Like on the starting at the end of the workday on Friday until early morning on Monday, it's all free. That's where I broke a record, like 20 hours straight. It was difficult. Like it took me a week to recover after that because it messed up my sleep cycle a lot. Because when you're in this mode where you see the end approaching, but it always goes a bit further apart. You're chasing after it and it keeps moving away. I become like a dog with a bone. I want to finish it. And to organize yourself is not. I remember there's a fantastic Harvard Business Review article which is called "Manage Your Energy, Not Your Time." So I do manage my energy more than anything else. Like if I feel that I cannot now, it doesn't. I'm pushing myself too hard, and I spend far more time than I expected to get something done because I'm just basically squeezed dry of ideas, or I cannot get unstuck. I cannot get unstuck from something. Go for a walk. I have a cat now, so spend some time with the cat. Go for a drive, meet friends, do something totally different. Play a video game, just anything. And the processing happens here in the background. And then you come back to the same old stuff that was troubling you, and you come to it with a fresh pair of eyes.
Speaking of
and with more energy.
The last question I always ask on the podcast, if the guest is a Leanpub author, and I'm sure I asked you this the first time, is, and maybe I'll ask you to just take the same question again. If there was one thing while you were in that final stretch, if there was one thing that Leanpub could have fixed for you about our platform, or if there was one thing we could have built for you, can you think of anything that you would ask us to do?
No, honestly, this time, no. What happened this time, what was different is after the first few chapters, which were written on an IKEA chair in front of the TV, kind of with half the brain hemisphere listening to some series and the other half writing, thinking, and so on. This time, after the first few chapters, I pulled the text, put in Markdown files, and I worked on it on VS Code. Okay. Because I needed the flexibility of managing the revisions and so on. But this is for a technical book. For a fiction book, I think, I wrote entire books on Leanpub's online editor. All the other books have been written there, or mostly there. So this time the experience was smooth throughout, except that the book took ages to render for a while.
Right, of course.
But then I realized, okay, it's 500 pages, Pandoc or whatever, it's ASCII doc, whatever you have in the back end it's struggling to render the PDF for so many pages. And I learned that, okay, I press create preview, I get up, have a coffee, play with the cat, check my messages, browse LinkedIn, and then when I'm back, I can check out so from my point of view, I know it sounds weird to say it's all perfect, but I have no qualms about Leanpub. In fact, that's why the other books are also on Leanpub, the ones that are coming.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that. If you do ever find yourself shaking your fist at Leanpub, just let me know what you're shaking your fist at. Well, Isaac, thank you very much for taking some time out of your evening today to talk to all of us. For everyone watching, the book is Northwind Elixir Traders: Learn Elixir and Database Modeling with Ecto and SQLite, all in one project. It's a really great book. If you really want to learn about this kind of stuff, I highly recommend it. So thank you very much, Isaac, for being on the Leanpub podcast.
Thank you.